actually planning on taking the floor now, but I'm going to use the opportunity because this is a subject that I really take to heart, and I'm really happy that we're bringing all these folks together to talk about the issues surrounding sexual misconduct and culture in the CAF. As a professor at the Royal Military College in the past few years, I've had really interesting conversations with the students and those who are asking themselves, well, will I be here for the long haul? Am I here for 5 years, 10 years, or 30 years? And it really came down to this idea of, is the culture a space where I want to be? And I think that we're having these conversations is just such a key element to make sure that we're recruiting and retaining the right people for the future of the Canadian Armed Forces. So thank you all for being here, for having this conversation, for making it open to the public. I'm going to hand it over to Chris Whitecross, who's back online with us, but she'll be on her phone this time around, and she'll do the introductions for Mercedes afterwards. So off to you, Chris.
Thanks, Yuri, and sorry, folks. Don't know what happened here, but I've lost my internet connection. So I just welcome back to the next panel, panel 6. As Yuri has implied, is gender and the operational culture in the Canadian Armed Forces. A topic that is extremely of interest and passion to me as well. And I'd really like to thank our panelists for coming. They've come from all over the world, and I know they'll be introduced by our moderator, Mercedes Stephenson. But I just want to thank you for doing this. It's not just timely, but it's important. So if I can introduce Mercedes quickly. Mercedes is the Bureau Chief for Global News in Ottawa and the host of the network's flagship Sunday political program, The West Block. I just want to welcome Mercedes, and I want to send it back over to you for moderating this session. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, General Whitecross. It is truly an honor to be here today to talk about what is a very difficult topic. And it's a topic that right now has really shaken the armed forces to its core. I've spoken to lots of folks of all ranks and genders who are saying that this is what they're thinking about, what they're talking about, a topic that many thought perhaps had been dealt with in 2015. And now here we are in 2021 with what one person put, who is a serving member of the CAF, as the Me Too movement for the Canadian Armed Forces, that is really facing these questions about how to move forward. What is the problem? Why is this happening? How widespread is it? And so I really appreciate our panelists joining us today, who are people who have dedicated their lives to serving this country. Two of whom are women who have been in the Canadian Armed Forces and seen what it's like to be a woman serving. Also, we have the Chief Warrant Officer, Chief Petty Officer for the Canadian Armed Forces, because I think a really important part of this is the non-commissioned officer aspect. We talk about officers a lot. We often don't talk about the other side, that side that forms the bulk of the Canadian Armed Forces. And of course, we have a wonderful expert with us as well, who is so knowledgeable on this topic and really bring that academic knowledge and research to it. So I'm just going to give a really quick introduction of everyone. We're going to go around and have an opportunity for everyone to say their thoughts first. We'll dive into some questions, then we'll take some of your questions from the audience. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our panelists who are joining us today. First of all, Rear Admiral Rebecca Patterson. She is the commander of the Canadian Armed Forces Health Services. She is also the Defense Champion for Women. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Heer, who is the commander of Joint Task Force Ukraine. And I think I first met Sarah on another panel talking about women in the armed forces about 15 years ago. So here we are back again to talk about this some more. We have as well Chief Warrant Officer, Chief Petty Officer, Gilles Grégoire, who is joining us. So we really appreciate you being on the panel, sir. And Dr. Alan Okros, Okros, if I could speak today, who is the Deputy Director of Research at the Dallaire Center for Excellence for Peace and Security. And he has spoken and educated people extensively on some of the topics we're going to be dealing with today. So Rear Admiral Patterson, if I can hand it to you first as the Defense Champion for Women, your thoughts on gender and operational culture in the military.
So thank you very much, Mercedes, and it really is a big honor to be here today because like General Whitecross, this is an issue that is very close to my heart. And I have to say that this year's conference theme of securing democracy against death by 1,000 cuts is kind of a suitable analogy to what the Canadian Armed Forces has been trying to address since 2015. And it isn't that it's just one or two incidents, it's cumulatively is demanding that we completely reshape how we think about how we approach culture in the Canadian Armed Forces. So I know some of the topics today are talking about, so what have we learned since we started Operation Honor? And I'm going to say what's different now. So to give the audience a quick understanding if they're not familiar, so in 2015, Operation Honor was launched, and it was actually based on a tried and true military approach for executing operations, and it was linear in nature because that's what we know how to do. And the early focus was by essential requirement to respond to a crisis, to support people affected by sexual misconduct, to respond to incidents, to prevent it from occurring, and then really significantly to understand why this was happening. But as time has progressed, and as you have seen unfold since 2015 in the media, we started to realize that that linear approach was insufficient, that sexual misconduct was bigger than just stopping a behavior from occurring because people were still getting harmed. But there's also recognition that we needed to establish ways and means to prevent sexual misconduct and also do an in-depth analysis to truly understand where we were. So since that time, there's been a lot of research that has been conducted. We have seen the stand-up of an external CAF center for expertise. We've engaged in international collaboration to better understand the problem space and to share best practices. We've embraced an independent external evaluation process and have actively sought external subject matter expertise to help guide our efforts. But most importantly, the Sexual Misconduct Response Center, which, as I'm going to restate, is external to the Canadian Armed Forces, has engaged those who have been harmed by sexual misconduct fulsomely to help them participate in the development of programs, but also to critically review and evaluate the efforts that the CAF has been making. So over the past 5 years, this has caused us to fundamentally shift how we approach and think about things in a military context. And as you know, with any great big hegemonic organization, that is a challenge. So is Operation Honor working? I guess it depends what that means to you. So if I pull what I'm hearing in the press, well, it's been 5 years and we haven't eliminated sexual misconduct, so Operation Honor isn't working. We haven't achieved cultural change. We don't release everybody who has perpetrated sexual misconduct, regardless of where it is on the spectrum. So I think we need to step back a second and say, so what is working? So what we have learned is that we have to challenge how militaries traditionally think about operations, because it is an operation right now. Specifically, that sexual misconduct cannot be treated like a simple mission that needs to be achieved, but rather that sexual misconduct is highly complex, it's a persistent challenge that exists not just in the Canadian Armed Forces, but within the whole of Canadian society. And that in order to even hope to address the issue of sexual misconduct, we're going to look at something that is profoundly damaging symptom of maybe greater cultural issues within the CAF. So sexual misconduct does not happen in a vacuum. And it's one of the number one symptoms that you have to have a look at that is going to require us to critically reevaluate our culture. And what we're actually looking for is not just to stop, but not to allow it to occur in the first place. And I think another important note is we hear a lot around us that it affects women. It's a women's issue. Yes, it affects women and minority groups disproportionately, both in Canada and in the Canadian Armed Forces, but we cannot lose sight of the fact that men are harmed too, and they are even more silent than women in this issue. It's not a women's issue. Sexual misconduct is a human issue. So it's also, we have learned that it's a wicked and complex problem that requires a critical look at our existing culture and the requirement to shift focus on long-term change. And to do that, we have to fundamentally change how we think in militaries and how we look at ourselves as a profession of arms. And yeah, that is a revelation in a very traditional structure. So I think the other concern is, so why is change so slow? So why are we so slow in changing our culture, especially when the vast majority of CAF members want to change and continue to serve honorably and do not perpetrate acts of sexual misconduct themselves? So we know culture change isn't easy in any organization, and Dr. Okros will certainly, in fact, I may have even lifted it from him, is that militaries are traditionally challenged because of fairly strict structures, mores, and practices. So we keep saying culture change takes time, but it requires men and women of the Canadian Armed Forces to critically challenge both the invisible and visible aspects of our culture, the long-held beliefs and practices, and realize that just because we did it in the past doesn't mean we should continue doing it that way or continue doing it in the future. It's not easy. And it makes a difference that that is being recognized. So I guess the next question I have to reflect on is, so why is change taking so much time? And what is change? So we could talk about stopping sexual misconduct, et cetera, but realistically, the actual cultural change I believe that we're looking for is an institution that allows everybody, no matter who you are, to work in an environment that respects you, that trusts you, that treats you with honor and dignity, and that we never ever stop aspiring to a Canadian Armed Forces where we don't have sexual misconduct. It will always be a relentless journey. In other words, moving beyond that mission space. So one of the proposals that we know is very important to facilitate cultural change is to increase the recruitment of women and other minority groups to effect enduring cultural change. So in my current capacity as Defence Champion for Women, I want to briefly focus on women and all the intersections that they actually represent. So one of the challenges for change is that globally, the CAF is an institution that was designed by men for men a long time ago, and that the visible and invisible barriers that women are facing to progressing into leadership positions, to be into a position of change within the CAF is actually a reflection of those structures and processes and norms that meets the needs of a dominant white male heteronormative culture. So to truly integrate women and other minorities, we need to continue to move forward with not just having a policy or an order to treat everyone equally and not harm each other, because that's always exist, but for everybody to internalize and embody CAF military ethos, which amongst others values the inherent worth of each person. So generally, if we value each other, we're probably less likely to harm each other. That power differential balances out. So we need, as a CAF, to shift how we think about all persons and view everything which makes them unique and different as a force enabler rather than a threat to our operational effectiveness. And I think knowing that a number of the audience today are our next generation of CAF leaders, and I think that those from RMC and CMR who are joining us, they actually deserve no less. And I do believe we're at another inflection point in time. So is the CAF capable of changing its culture? So in 1993, I deployed with the Canadian Airborne Regiment to Somalia. I was one of about 7 women in support of Operation Deliverance. And on return, as a young officer, similar to a number in our audience today, I was pulled into the Commission of Inquiry into the deployment of Canadian forces in Somalia as both a witness and also a participant in a study into the culture of the regiment. It was, by all accounts, a crisis point for the Canadian Armed Forces, Canadian Armed Forces culture, and actually for me personally. As profoundly difficult as it was, is my opinion that as a serving woman, that the CAF has emerged as stronger as an organization and set us on a path to truly codify what the profession of arms is and what ethical conduct should look like. But I gotta say, we've still got much more to do to become an inclusive and diverse organization. And this is absolutely going to be essential in order to address the symptom of sexual misconduct. So the CAF needs to continue on the culture change path that's been set. It needs to be afforded time with transparency, external review, and contribution by subject matter experts and affected persons and survivors to achieve that long-term objective. But in the meantime, we've got to continue to amplify support to those affected. We have to implement sustainable programs that we are already continuing to do and have policies that are meaningful to those at the tactical level so they can start affecting their own change. And we've got to double down on all efforts to understand why some individuals perpetrate sexual misconduct in the military context. And one of our biggest strengths that we do have is that we have a leadership that is motivated and fully invested into trying to make this change. And I think we can make it if history predicts future. So what have we accomplished? A fundamental shift in acknowledging and addressing the complex interwoven factors, and that they do not detract from our operational effectiveness if we become diverse and inclusive and work on addressing sexual misconduct. We've seen slow but appreciable progress in Operation Honor, but we've got a lot of work to do. I'm under no illusions there, and it's far from complete. So I hope that the efforts that we continue to make moving forward that it really is going to make a difference for that young generation who's out there today. Because like myself, when I was a young officer coming out of the Somalia peace, I wanted a future and a culture that supported who I was. I know we have places to go, but I know we can achieve it because the Canadian public, they expect it, CAF members deserve it, and I actually believe we will achieve it. Thanks, Mercedes.
Helpful. I muted myself. At this point in the pandemic, you'd think I'd know to unmute, but no. Thank you very much. We appreciate your very thoughtful comments. Lieutenant Colonel Heer, I want to turn it over to you. I know you've taken a bit of a really interesting approach to this with not only your own thoughts, but canvassing those who you serve with for their thoughts. So fascinated to hear what you found out.
Great, thanks Mercedes. And I just have to say it is quite a privilege to be asked to participate in such an important panel and to provide you with my tactical and operational perspective. So here in Ukraine, our task force remains very focused on the military capacity building mission known as Operation UNIFIER. For those unfamiliar with capacity building missions, those are activities undertaken to develop institutional capabilities of a host nation in order to create enduring effects. It's worth noting that Operation UNIFIER has been going on for just over 5 years. Progress is slow, but it's steady. We continue to adapt, remain flexible in our assistance, and we strive to shape the next generation of Ukrainian military leaders. So as I started to prepare my notes for today, I really realized that all of our efforts with Operation Honor are in essence our own internal defense team capacity building mission. And I'd say just like Operation UNIFIER, I'd suggest we need to have tactical patience, we need to adapt, and we need to continually refine our efforts to enable real enduring effects. So I'll start off by just sharing that the overwhelming consensus at my level is that we need to stay the course. Any possible knee-jerk reactions or rumors of scrapping our current efforts are very concerning to CAF members. I agree that there's elements of the branding that probably need to be considered, but the underlying effort to strengthen a culture of mutual respect is essential. The reactions felt by most in my sphere over the last month can really be generalized in a few main sentiments. For one, I'd say we're angry. We're angry that allegations of inappropriate behavior continue. We're also tired of constantly being generalized as victims for those of us that are women and sexual predators for my male colleagues. Additionally, I'd say we're frustrated as it appears as though a lot of the progress being made is being discounted. As the Admiral said, the vast majority of members understand that treating people with dignity and respect is not only the right thing to do, but it's actually essential to our existence as a cohesive fighting force. So from my perspective, there are signs that Operation Honor is working. Our most junior members are much more inclusive, they're much more open-minded, and Operation Honor has enabled them to understand what is appropriate and inappropriate behavior. I have multiple examples of junior NCMs explaining to me that other junior NCMs are correcting inappropriate behavior and they're educating their peers about what's right and what's wrong. We also see examples at the unit level of individuals coming forward to report events that happened months and sometimes even years in the past. Although this does come with challenges, I see it as a positive sign that we do have that trust from some members and that people do feel that action will be taken. But with that said, I'm also realistic in my perspective, and there is significant work to be done. At various levels, there's still a fear to report. Some members don't feel that information is kept confidential. Some members feel that when they report inappropriate behavior, they don't see immediate action. This may not be the case, but that perception of inaction by the chain of command truly does erode the trust. Additionally, I still find that a lot of members don't understand the different resources at their disposal. I think we have to find a better way to educate them. Our once-a-year annual briefings are just not cutting it. Somehow we need to ingrain this into our everyday fabric of our communication. And I'd also say that leaders at my level, we're not really trained, and some of us do not know how to react when a member comes forward with issues. And our default is normally to defer them to an external agency. But sometimes all it needs is just to sit down, let a person be heard, show them some compassion, and support them when they're harmed. So the question that was raised to us is, do we have a culture problem? I honestly don't feel qualified to answer that question, but I do find myself wondering if our culture can adapt to keep pace with society. Can we adjust and maintain the level of discipline required to lead troops in war? Personally, I'd like to focus on what I can control at my level, and that's listening to the members that are under my command and understanding what they need from me. So there's two main themes that come up and have come up over the last month as I've been trying to get some conversations going, and that's power and trust. So in an organization like the CAF, there is a significant power imbalance. For many reasons, it has to be this way. However, as officers, and I think at NCOs as well, I don't think we fully appreciate what can happen when that power dynamic gets out of whack or is abused. As a CO, people definitely treat me differently. Just last week, I had a private in my office here working with my computer, and I asked him how the tour's going, and he looked at me and he said, "Ma'am, if it's okay, I'd like to talk to you like a real person." I said, "Yeah, I would really appreciate that." So, joking aside, I recognize that I come from a privileged experience. Right from officer cadet at RMC to now as a lieutenant colonel, I've always felt empowered to use my voice, and I've often used it even when some of my peers felt they couldn't. I'm not sure why that is, but I recognize my privileged position. Unfortunately, in speaking to a number of members of my team, I realized I was pretty naive in thinking that all women, and for that matter, all members of the Canadian Forces, felt they could use their voice. Unfortunately, they don't feel they can use their voice. A lot of them don't feel that they can speak up, and they still struggle to fit in, and they don't want to rock the boat. As a commanding officer in command, we're given a large degree of power to discipline, power to reward, and we focus on that power a lot. But I think it's also important to focus on the responsibility that comes with command, and that's the responsibility for the well-being of our members. And with that responsibility, we have a requirement to demonstrate compassion, empathy, and humility. Trust is the other theme that comes up quite a bit. Whether we're in brigades, battalions, platoons, or section, at every level, trust is a key component in our ability to achieve our respective missions. In the military, we're constantly operating in an environment of risk and uncertainty. And, we like to say we need to be able to thrive in chaos. To be able to do that, trust has to be at our foundation. I think open dialogue and communication are critical in creating trust, and we need to continue to foster a climate where all ranks feel comfortable bringing issues forward. A really disturbing observation I've heard recently is that a lot of members fear open discussion on this topic. They're worried about being accused of inappropriate comments and behavior just in having a conversation. So somehow we need to find a way to talk about these behaviors without that fear of repercussion. We have a chain of command for a very important reason, and that separation at times is definitely required. But somehow we have to find mechanisms to cut through that vertical chain. I can say in my peer group of fellow commanding officers, I've seen a lot of interesting techniques to try to sort this out. Some members are using social media to reach out to their members. Others are conducting unit morale surveys. Others are using online chat forums. Some are actually creating feedback boxes in their unit lines to give members a more private way of bringing up their concerns. So how can we address the trust and power dynamics in our culture? I'd start by saying, I don't think this answer is solely the acting CDSs or the DMs to fix. Obviously, top-down direction is necessary, but I believe as a commanding officer, this is my responsibility, and it's the responsibility of all of our unit leadership to get involved. I have the ability at my level to lead the change that I want to see. And I think it's very important we enable our NCOs. Here in the Ukraine, they are the foundation of this mission. We rely heavily on NCOs every day to use their initiative and their leadership to help our partners. And I think as we move forward with evolving our culture, NCOs and the NCO Corps will have to be front and center in owning that piece. I'd say coaching and mentorship are also crucial. I think we need to be able to provide more feedback on personal growth to our members and expand their perspectives on a variety of topics. I spent 2 years as the Director of Human Rights and Diversity, and I have to say that job I learned more than any other job I've in, because it opened my mind to so many different perspectives that I wasn't familiar with. And I think we need to encourage our members to find ways to learn about topics that make them uncomfortable, because I think there are quite a few topics that make our members uncomfortable. I'll close by saying, I used to be guilty of saying, you need to just wait for the dinosaurs to leave and then everything will be better. But a junior officer said to me this week, she said, ma'am, dinosaurs can create new dinosaurs in the younger generation if they pass on the same approaches. And she's right. It's really not about getting rid of dinosaurs. I think what matters is getting rid of those inappropriate mindsets that can really, develop at any generation. We just need to find a way to keep the power dynamics in check, foster trust at all levels. But I'll just close by saying, I've been a member of Canadian Armed Forces for 23 years now, and I'm extremely proud of this organization. We've done a lot of work, but I recognize there's a lot of work to do. And I think you can see from the dedication of this panel how committed we are to doing the work that needs to be done. Thank you, Mercedes.
Thank you very much, Lieutenant Colonel Heer. And I can tell you that I know for a lot of young women, seeing your example as a woman in the combat arms, even just on this panel, is really inspiring. So thank you for taking the time to join us, especially from Ukraine. You were just speaking about the importance of NCOs and enlisted members. So I'd like to turn it over at this point to Chief Petty Officer First Class, Grégoire, for his thoughts on how this is all playing out and what the issues are for our NCOs and enlisted members in the Canadian Armed Forces.
Thank you, Mercedes. It is with great privilege that I'm here today to discuss the significance of culture in a military organization like the Canadian Armed Forces. So my intent is to give you a non-commissioned member's point of view. And as Mercedes identified, the importance because Canadian Armed Forces is comprised of over 70% NCMs, who just like the officer corps, consider themselves professionals within the discipline they have chosen to serve. As NCMs, we have clear roles as we work directly for the officer corps. Therefore, the officer NCM roles are distinct from each other. However, their working relationship is a complementary one. A positive and professional relationship between these two unique leadership corps creates and sustains a healthy and productive command climate, the key to any leadership team. Every day, our women and men deliver excellence in international and domestic operations with their professionalism, selflessness, dedication, courage, sacrifice, and just a commitment to do a job well done. Mission accomplishment is always tied to people. Personally, myself as a sailor with almost 1,800 days at sea, 5 operational missions, and coming up to 35 years of service, whenever I saw successful missions, successful ships, or successful departments, it is a result of 2 things: solid leadership and good culture. You cannot have one without the other to be truly effective in my book. But today we're still facing harmful elements of our military culture that, as far as I'm concerned, we should have shed a long time ago. A sexualized culture has absolutely no place in an organization that prides itself on values like duty, loyalty, integrity, courage. The wrongdoings of people in an organization like ours has an asymmetrical negative effect on our people, which results in the loss of effectiveness on our missions and, more importantly, loss of trust in our people. In 2021, there are certain behaviors and attitudes exhibited towards our personnel that are beyond troubling, as acknowledged by Acting CDS General Heer. None of us should ever tolerate, condone behaviors or attitudes that threatens the well-being of our people. Everyone who serves in this great nation must have a simple right to be safe from sexual misconduct and to be respected as a member of the Canadian Armed Forces serving Canada. As the CAF chief, I want all to know that I'm invested in making the changes and the improvements in our NCM training and education system to weed out this rot in our culture. Since taking office, I have focused a lot of my attention in our professional military education for NCMs. Improving education will have a positive influence in many of my priorities, so it is a very important task that I am striving to achieve. We need to exploit a continuum of education, experiential opportunities, and learnings that impart an even greater focus on a human code that is designed to be against personal biases, generational and cultural diversity, gender inclusivity, consequences of power, mental entrenchment, listening skills, leading through tragedy, emotional balance and emotional intelligence, embracing critical thinking, just to name for a few. For me, that is what building the force of the future is all about. And at the senior NCO level, my goal is to strengthen the exercise of good command by shaping a strong chief corps, by making the senior NCO embrace the absolute nature of accountability, responsibility, and integrity that is so critically associated with their rank, influence, and the impacts it has. As your CAF Chief Warrant Officer, and with the assistance of my members of my inner council, the most senior Chief Warrant Officers and Chief Petty Officers in each of our commands, we have begun these initiatives, and we see so much potential in them. I want to inform all of you who are listening that in the very near future, emotional intelligence will be added to the curriculum of all future NCM leadership training, from primary leadership qualifications all the way up to senior leadership and senior appointment programs. Our Canadian Defence Academy and our OSIT Institute are hard at work to make the improvements we expect on how to teach the art of leadership. This will help the force of tomorrow, but we also need to address the current issue. I've heard General Heer say on numerous occasions, we cannot accept our own people being harmed from within, and we cannot accept abuse of power entrusted in us by virtue of rank or position. Leading in this institution is a privilege. It is not a right. We must also trust the people who come forward, and they must be believed, they must be protected, and they must be given the right to tell their story without being fearful of reprimand, revenge, or reprisal. No one should be punished for telling the truth. This is a confidence moment as far as I'm concerned, and our institution must shed this unacceptable conduct if we want to rebuild trust in our organization. So I will end there, Mercedes, and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Really insightful and forward-moving comments, which it's nice. You know, I can tell you as a journalist, often when we talk to military or government people, we don't get substance. There's so much substance so far on this panel already today. It's really appreciated. So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Okros, migraine today, can't talk, who will be giving us his perspective. And I know, sir, you've done a tremendous amount of research and advising on this. So your thoughts on the situation as we find it today in 2021.
Thank you, Mercedes. I'll talk to the culture change piece. And to start, I'll offer that the new strategy, the path, is a needed expansion on Operation Honor, but it remains too shallow and too narrow. It's shallow because, first, the issue remains about sex and sexualized behavior, not about power. The focus remains on bad apples, so it fails to examine systemic factors, and it still doesn't articulate what parts of CAF culture are to change and what parts are to be preserved. It's too narrow by not addressing key upstream or downstream issues. The focus remains on the activities from when an incident occurs until sanctions are awarded and the file can be closed. Culture change is a critical key upstream issue I'll talk to, but the other key gap is the failure to provide leaders with the narrative skills and enabling policies to affect required change. There's three downstream issues. The first is protecting the reputation of those who file complaints. As we've already heard, doing so is still seen by many to be a career-ending move. Second is restoring small unit cohesion. Again, leaders are not well equipped to do this effectively. The smell persists long after the file is closed. The most critical is not recognizing the damage done by military sexual trauma. It destroys people's identity, their self-worth, their pride in serving. It's a moral injury that requires comprehensive long-term treatment and social support. We need effective mechanisms of voice, restorative engagement for processes, and long-term healing. So what needs to be changed in CAF culture? The first is the use of social hierarchies about who is important and who isn't, which is done using gendered and racialized stereotypes and language, which marginalize, shun, and silence some. Second, career success requires individuals to engage in very masculine ways of thinking, acting, and reacting. These can and should be amended. Third, the construction of the warrior that accentuates aggression, dominance, and violence are harmful. Alternate constructions emphasizing restraint, humility, and honor would be helpful. Finally, providing agency to those harmed and ensuring the ability of those charged with maintaining good order and discipline to do so effectively, particularly the capacity of senior NCOs to informally deal with social frictions. A key here is to shift from the duty to report to a duty to respond. The CAF has not addressed these core issues as they touch on what I call double-edged swords, facets seen as necessary for operational effectiveness, but that can create unhealthy environments. Job number one of all military leaders is to build cohesive, effective teams that pull together under arduous circumstances. This requires the power of commanders to direct, motivate, and discipline subordinates. But it also signals that it's acceptable for individuals to use their social power against others. It also requires obedience to authority, normative conformity, and group loyalty, which can create the conditions under which individuals then remain silent. And it needs pure loyalty and the knowing their buddy will have their back. But this means people are constantly judging others, and outdated stereotypes continue to put women under the microscope to constantly be tested and forced to prove they can do the job. So where are we? CAF leaders seem to believe this is about doing enough culture change to eliminate harassment without undermining operational effectiveness. I think this is the wrong logic. The central issues are the second-order outcomes in the CAF leadership doctrine, maintaining public confidence, trust, and support, which are earned or eroded through perceived legitimacy and perceived effectiveness. It's legitimacy that's in question here, not effectiveness. The CAF has been here before. Recall the 1989 Human Rights Tribunal on Women in Combat Roles concluded that the emphasis the CAF gave to preserving cohesion and operational effectiveness did not justify policies and culture that discriminated against women. We've got two panel members here today that are proof that the tribunal was right and the CAF of the day was wrong. But the fact remains that we are talking about women and others being harmed is clear evidence that 30 years later, the CAF has not achieved what the tribunal directed. So I'll conclude that the key issue is the one that arose following Somalia. If CAF leaders cannot make real and significant progress, the authority of the CDS as the head of the profession of arms to self-regulate professional functioning is at risk. I'm looking forward to our panel discussions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Doctor. Incredibly insightful, and I found fascinating when you said this is a moral injury, because it took us a long time to understand PTSD as a moral injury, and the significance that that has, the identity that these women and men who are victims have as a warrior, and what it means to admit that you've been hurt, not only by someone else, but by someone on your own team. And one of the terms that I keep hearing over and over again from people is the domestic enemy, that there should be really focused on rooting these people out. And they're not all necessarily a bad person. Someone does it once. They still need to be dealt with because of the effect that has on morale, the effect that has on someone who's put on their uniform and said, here I am, I'm willing to die for my country. But when I come forward because someone who I'm supposed to be able to trust is hurting me, it jeopardizes my career, and I'm still seen as the problem. And I'm seeing this with dozens and dozens of women in my inbox. And I've known some of these women for many, many years. One was telling me that she gave an interview about Operation Honor, talking about how well it was working. And then now she feels like she almost betrayed other women because she knew from her own experience it wasn't. But she felt maybe if she kept saying in public enough times that things were okay, women would get to the table, and male victims too would get to the table, and they'd be able to flip it. And there's a feeling of exhaustion that hasn't happened on a moral level. I want to kind of take this to the elephant in the room, and that's that what we've been talking about right now has largely been allegations by very senior members of the Canadian Armed Forces. This is a hierarchical culture. You're supposed to be able to trust your leaders. You know, Rear Admiral Patterson, what effect does this have on morale if there is concern that generals are being treated very differently than corporals? And if you look at the statistics on the punishments, it's certainly disproportionate lower ranks, not the highest ranking individuals. And in fact, some people say the system isn't even designed to handle that.
So when we're talking about morale, it's do we actually take action? So I have to admit, I cannot go back into the past. I don't have the statistics on that. I think what is very compelling right now is that we are actually addressing people and what they have done in the past, maybe the present, I don't know, regardless of their rank, that it is going to go through an investigative process. What it does to morale is, I think I'm going to go back more to elements of CAF culture, where, as Lieutenant Colonel Heer said, we are a culture built on trust. We are a rigidly hierarchical power-based structure that requires trust. It requires us to trust the next person to make sure that you're going to be with me as I am willing to go to the greatest extent and step into danger. So I think that one of the biggest impacts on morale is the sense of betrayal, that we thought that, you know, you're walking the walk, but now are you walking the walk? It's the inconsistency that has been really challenging. But when it comes down to actual process, I can't speak to the past. I don't have examples of that, but in the current setting, in the current context, both cases are being dealt with in the same manner as it would with anybody in the CAF when it comes to penalties. Like I said, I do apologize. I can't actually comment on that. But I think that what we really need to think about is the overall impact on trust of the Canadian Armed Forces as events like this go over, because we are founded on trust.
Chief Petty Officer Grégoire, you're representing non-commissioned members here today. I want to put that question to you. If there's a sense of frustration that there's a double standard on who's held accountable here.
Well, I tell you what I've personally seen is that no. Usually, whoever commits an incident, at least in my personal experience and where I've been on board ship, and I've heard of some of the incidents that occurred. My commanding officer made sure that we took it everyone seriously, whether it was something that happened at the low level or it's something that happened at the officer corps. So inherently myself, what I've always seen is that once there is an allegation, it is taken very seriously. And I know every time that I've been in any chain of command, I know myself is that it's just, first of all, it's unacceptable. And then we deal with it as fast and as correct as we can, because we do have to follow our processes, and we have to make sure that the victim is taken care of, and also the perpetrator needs to be taken care of as well. So we need to make sure that we get the facts and that we carry on with it. So my personal experience is that wherever I've been is that it's been taken care of, and it's always been taken very seriously.
Lieutenant Colonel Heer, sorry, go ahead.
I'd like to add to that too, as an observation based on Chief Grégoire's comments. What is really surprising to me is the fact that people are coming forward and making, passing on their allegations and actually reporting what is going on. That is quite significant. And I'm not a rainbows and unicorns kind of person, but I think it's a very interesting reflection on where we are in our culture, that people actually are believing that they can step forward. And I got to say, since the beginning of Operation Honor, it's like, step forward and say something, and we're there for you and we'll support you. So I think, they're stepping forward. Where my concern lies is the fact that they don't feel confident coming to the chain of command, and that's part of that betrayal in trust. So yeah, thanks a lot, Mercedes, for letting me add that.
Yeah, absolutely. Lieutenant Colonel Heer, what are you hearing from your troops about this, and whether they feel comfortable with reporting it when it's coming from someone above them in the chain of command, not a colleague or a subordinate?
Yeah, I think, when your story broke, obviously, as a leader, I had a responsibility to start that conversation. We had to address it, like you said. So immediately, without being prompted, at all levels, I think you started to see very open and honest conversations occurring. I sat down with all of my team. I gave them a reflection of how I was feeling, sort of summarizing those sentiments I've already touched on. But then I asked them all to sort of reflect on what their role is moving forward and how are they going to communicate. It's very easy when somebody comes forward so publicly, like was done on your show. It's very easy to start pointing fingers at the victim. And I was very direct with my folks that, by doing that, we could be, potentially having other people not want to come forward. And I think, it's a bit of ownership of this space. Like I said, although, the individuals that have been identified are senior ranking, I think we all need to sort of reflect on our piece of this and our role moving forward. So all I can comment on is what I've done at my level. And I can say, that is one positive that's come from this, is that we're now having very honest and frank discussions. And I hope, we have a lot of work to do to continue to work on our trust and our power dynamics. But I think at least getting those conversations going again is a step in the right direction.
Doctor, how do you address these power dynamics? And that's what you're talking about, that it's treated purely as a sexual issue, but there's a power issue in this. And the military fundamentally is about a power structure. That's also why it works when you go to war. And a lot of folks say, well, how do you keep the balance between what is fundamentally an organization where you have to have incredible discipline, power, sort of this toughness, but at the same time, what you were mentioning of reinterpreting or transitioning that into a new frame. How do you achieve this kind of culture change that doesn't seem to be happening?
So yes, power is an element that needs to exist in the military, formal powers, formal authorities. One of the things that I would suggest that could be helpful to assist leaders and particularly commanders is an expansion on the leadership toolkit. And I was involved with the development of the current CAF leadership doctrine. It's now almost 20 years old. And I think one of the things that has been developing elsewhere that people are looking for is more inclusive approaches to leadership. And inclusive leadership models, one of the key things with that is you work to reduce the power imbalances. You reduce this huge social status. Lieutenant Colonel Heer talked to this in terms of the commanding officer, the CO, and I can't talk to the CO. I can't say that to them. Good leaders are finding ways of reducing those differences so people feel more comfortable speaking up, speaking out, engaging at a personal level. It's a challenge for the military. And I think it's been alluded to before, the majority of the people that are in command roles have learned how to perform the role of commander by watching the people that came before them. And in many occasions, they haven't seen people prior to them that have exhibited a more open, inclusive sort of approach to command. So I think we've got a generation, a cohort of commanders right now and senior NCOs that are working with them as part of leadership teams. They're trying to figure this out. They're trying to figure out how do we create more inclusive approaches? How do we reduce these power imbalances? I think that's a key part of what need to be done and why I made my comments that I don't think leaders at all levels have been fully equipped to lead the change that they've been mandated to put forward. I think they all know what the objective is and what needs to be done. They don't know how to do it effectively. So I think that's a key part, is giving them the tools, the skills, the narrative, the capacity. And Chief Grégoire mentioned one of the ones of emotional intelligence. It's been an issue that's been raised in the past of this would be something helpful in the leadership toolkit.
One question that I want to put to all of you is whether this can be fixed internally. And Al touched on this when he was talking about the danger that regulation will no longer be self-regulation. We have the government talking about creating some sort of an independent reporting system for sexual misconduct. One of the things that I have heard over and over again in the women and men that I've spoken to about this is that in particular, when it was a commanding officer, there was a feeling they could not go to their chain of command because your chain of command is who is perpetrating this in this case, or that they believed people above them in the chain of command were complicit, were aware, were willfully blind at times. They didn't think that they would be believed, that there would be career repercussions, and that even going to the military police, I mean, we talk about how they are independent. They are an independent police force, but they do report back to the VCDS. They are a part of the chain of command in the military. Is this something, whether it's reporting or fixing it, that the military can fix itself, or is it time to have some sort of oversight like we see in the US or Australia with an Office of the Inspector General? Rear Admiral Patterson, do you want to go first?
Sure, I think it would be pure speculation if I commented on that. And I think what we need to continue to do is work very collaboratively with external bodies to truly identify what is it that we need to achieve. I'm going to go back to Dr. Okros's comment there. So looking at having our leadership development, we need to know where the deltas are before we have to basically throw the baby out with the bathwater and determine which way to go. What I do think is that one of the key elements when you're talking about leadership as one of the driving components of culture change. There's not one organizational model out there on the civilian side, the business side, or in military structures that doesn't talk about the primacy of leadership driving change. Is I think one thing we're going to have to do is we're going to have to create those toolkits. But it's not only that, it's how we indoctrinate isn't the right word, inculcate people into the Canadian Armed Forces when they first step in the door. is when we start teaching emotional intelligence, do we wait until they're senior leaders? Do we start doing it earlier? How do we select? What do we look for in terms of qualities and attributes of leaders as we're looking at evaluating, promoting, and developing them? How do we look at barriers that are systematically excluding areas, occupations that most traditionally contain most of our minority groups, such as women? How about health services? We're about 48% women in health services. How do we look at what our unconscious bias is in allowing and unintentionally creating barriers to progression to the higher levels of leadership? And I think that's where we need to start first. So I know that's not what you asked, but I think that that's what I can say that I know from being within and having worked with external bodies as well.
Lieutenant Colonel Heer, what's your sense of sort of the pros and cons of taking things outside the organization?
Oh yeah, I mean, that is a very difficult question to answer, and I am a bit removed from it right now because I'm on operations and very much focused on that operation. I can say from a commanding officer perspective, obviously I want to be able to help the soldiers under my command as much as I possibly can, and I would like them to feel trusted to be able to bring issues to me. However, honestly, in my mind, the near fight is making sure that all CAF members are safe from sexual violence or harassment and misconduct. So I want them to use whatever mechanisms are available to get the answers they need as quickly as possible so that we can get back to working together. So I can see advantages and disadvantages to both. I did want to just comment on Dr. Okros' comment about, changing our culture and looking at that piece. I think changing our composition goes a long way from changing how we act internally and the leadership models that we have. And we've gone quite a bit of ways of changing our composition. If I look at this task force as one example, I have women at every single rank, from private all the way up to lieutenant colonel. Women are integrated, and it's organic. It wasn't forced. We didn't go through the TO&E and double check to make sure we had women at every rank level. That has just happened. That's now been the natural progression. And I think with those numbers, you're starting to see different models of leadership. You're starting to see different approaches. And I think, I can say from here in Ukraine, I know just having the diversity of our task force, we're providing that international example and hope for other countries. And I think internally to Canada as well, hopefully, like you said, the officer cadets watching are going to get many different examples of leadership now than they might have 20 years ago when they're following one mold of leadership. So that's what I can offer to that question.
Chief, what are your thoughts?
Well, the one thing I was always told when I was a junior chief is that, you cannot control this stuff. You can only manage it. So, and it is very important for us to understand that if you have an independent person who's going to come, they're going to have to deal with the same issues that we're dealing with today. But the issues that we're trying to deal we're trying to sort out is to try to sort out some of our culture issues. And we have some great areas in our culture that are very positive and very good. Unfortunately, this little bubble that we're seeing is nullifying almost all the greatness that's going on. So I would argue is that we need to still work on the culture piece, and that is still our responsibility as military folks who wear the uniform, is for us to work on the culture. So like I said, for myself and my chiefs, and I'm talking to my other chiefs, and I says, I'm trying to drive down the message as low as I can. And for me, telling to all my chiefs, they're all going to do the up and down nod because they get it right away. But for me, it's to get it down at the sergeant level. And that is where the interface with the junior NCMs and junior officers and senior NCOs and officers, that those ranks need to understand the importance of the culture shift in that. Plus the level of a complexity that's going on today. So we're talking sexual misconduct, we're talking hateful conduct, we're talking harassment. So all of these things are coming down on a junior supervisor who's also trying to make sure that he's taking care of the folks working them, making sure that the gun is working so that and then all of a sudden he's bombarded with all of these policies that they're kind of having a hard time to align and help and make sure that they can effectively use. But at the end of the day, and this goes from a senior NCO piece, if someone in your chain of command who you are taking care of is hurting or is something going on, you have a duty, you have a responsibility to take care of that person and figure it out how to get there. And I think we have lots of resources now to be able to do that. That's all I want to say.
Dr. Okros, we're talking about culture. We can fix the reporting mechanism. We can take it out of the chain of command, but that doesn't address the culture issue. And I'm looking at the questions from our audience right now, and all of them right now are asking the same question about culture and how do you implement it tangibly? What does it look like that you have to change culturally in the Canadian Armed Forces to deal with the root cause behind why this seems to keep happening?
So to answer that question, the military is a total institution. It has got a whole series of facets that come together that constantly, consistently send a message to everybody in uniform about who you are, what you do, what's important, how you believe. And one of the problems of the total institution is it's really hard for fish to discover water. It's hard for those that are internal within the organization and have spent 20 or 25 years drinking the Kool-Aid to really recognize and understand how it's actually functioning and how it's being perceived by individuals. So, part of your original question, where would outside perspectives be of use? Bringing outside perspectives in to challenge the taken for granted assumptions within the military. There's a whole host of history and customs and traditions, lessons learned, paid for in blood over the centuries that we never want to forget. It's hard to recognize how deeply some of those things become entrenched into the military and how these become the anchors that prevent the military from imagining a future military that they want to construct and build. So I think that's the core of the important work that needs to be done. It's why I talk to the double-edged swords. I recognize the parts that need to be kept, but there are ways in which culture can be shifted significantly, but it means asking and challenging and questioning a whole set of taken for granted assumptions. And Admiral Patterson talked to some of these things. What are the criteria of success? Was it getting the job done, or was it getting the job done and leaving the team whole and healthy? These things have important consequences. So it requires a comprehensive, this is why some of us are continuing to talk about institutional and systemic factors. It's not about individuals that don't get it. It's looking at what is the context in which they are being placed and how do we make changes to these institutional factors that send the right signal about what's important, what gets rewarded, and what don't you do. And I think there's work that needs to be done on clarifying that.
Lieutenant Colonel Heer, you talked about getting rid of the dinosaurs is not enough, and it makes me think of someone that I had a conversation with, young infantry master corporal who did not feel that women belong in the combat arms. It was surprising to me that someone that age would have that view. That's very much this one individual's view. And that led me to question some of the assumptions I'd had about, is this a generational thing in the military? Is it just the younger generation is going to come and fix it, or will it persist? What are your thoughts on the age differences here? Is this, a middle-aged white general problem, or is this a more broad problem that won't simply be solved as people age out of the military?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I definitely think, I can look at my own career and how many senior officers and senior NCOs mentored me along the way and, allowed me to lead in my own authentic, be my own authentic self, never made gender a question, made me a part of the team right from the get-go. So I don't think it's fair to say that those of our senior ranks are all dinosaurs that have inappropriate mindsets. That is very far from accurate in my mind. I think, back to that Master Corporal, the example you gave, I wonder where he learned that. I wonder if he's served with, the amount of women that are in the combat arms now that have, proven themselves in combat in Afghanistan and in other theaters. So I wonder if he heard that from somebody else, and then that became an accepted thing to say out loud. So I think, we have to kind of go back and really look at the root of where these comments and these beliefs are coming from.
Great. We just have a few minutes left, so I want to take a chance to just give everyone an opportunity for final thoughts. Dr. Okros, do you want to start?
I'll start and I'll just do one quick one, which is an extension of where I was. The military engages in myth making, and it's great to have the myth that all soldiers are 10 feet tall and invincible. These are good bedtime stories. The challenge becomes when the seniors start believing the myths, and then when they start taking decisions to preserve the myth rather than confronting reality. I think there are some myths about what's going on in the CAF that need to be challenged. And I'm not sure whether those that have been in the organization for 25 to 35 years, whether they're capable of challenging those myths, which is where I think the outside perspectives are useful. Thank you.
Chief? Sorry, I can see you writing your thoughts there.
No, look, for me, it's quite short. And, I tell everybody, we have a great book that was written in 2003. It's called Duty with Honor. And I tell everybody, okay, it is a little outdated in 2003. But if you read that book and truly follow the essence of that book, you cannot get in trouble. It is all about respect. It is about integrity. It is about the values that we have. It's about our ethos. And it says, it's 90 pages. Lots of photos, lots of pictures. So guess what? It's not really 90 pages. And I tell everybody, read that book and follow those rule sets. It's that simple. It's not complicated, but unfortunately, there's some people that chose not to read. And of course, this Master Corporal he was told or he was showed that, and it was allowed. And that's the reason why he is perpetuating that. And what has to happen is a sergeant needs to take him alongside, or a chief, and needs to either explain to him no, and if it still remains, then what I would recommend is that we open the door and we show him where he can go, and that's it. Thank you.
Lieutenant Colonel Heer, what would you say to women who are out there in the forces now, and to young women and men who are thinking about joining and they're wondering about these cultural issues? They want to serve their country, but they're unsure. What would your message to them be?
Yeah, thank you for that question, and I'm happy to answer it. The Canadian Armed Forces is made up of over 100,000 members, regular and reserve force, and all of them join to be part of something bigger than themselves, and they believe in serving their country. And I would encourage anyone that's thinking of joining the forces to give us a shot. Let us show you all the incredible aspects of our institution. The chief just talked about our values and our ethics. You can't. Being part of an organization that has such strong ethical principles and values goes a long way. And to all of them, I would say, we want you to join our institution, and we want you to be comfortable being your authentic self. Your differences are going to make us stronger, and it is the diversity of our force right now that I think is going to get us through this current challenge and let us see the other side. So thanks for that.
And over to you, Rear Admiral.
Same question or just final thoughts?
Final
thoughts. Yeah, so I'm in a very unique position. I'm a senior woman officer, but you notice I qualified myself as a woman officer. I know that we will actually see change when we don't have to talk about the first female VCDS, that we drop the gender as we talk. I think as we're moving forward that we are going to need to fundamentally change how we approach challenges that are as complex and diverse as this. And this is just a bigger picture from what Dr. Okros is saying. But I think I can also say I work with men, I work with women. And while not everybody is perfect when there's 100,000 of you, I can tell you that globally there is a great desire to know how to do this and be open to receiving outside advice, guidance, expertise, help us dig through this culture. This is what I'm sensing. And from the women of the CAF, we want to be able to see that we can move forward. And as part of that, you don't see me as a woman officer, that when you see me here, woman doesn't become something that devalues success. But I really believe that we are at an inflection point right now when we really are ready to continue moving forward. And we will continue to support those who've been harmed, but what the real future needs to be is we're not dealing with people who are harmed. So thanks very much, Mercedes.
Thank you very much to all of our panelists. Turn it over to you.
All right, thank you so much, Mercedes, and everyone on this panel was absolutely fascinating discussion, and thank you for your honesty and just for the rigor of the questions, Mercedes. I think this really worked out as good as we could hope for. But I want to say that from the CDA Institute's perspective, this is really just a first step for us. We're engaged in this conversation. We issued a statement 2 weeks ago. I've personally reached out to colleagues of mine across Canada who are doing work on this. I mean, Al and I wrote a book on cultural education a few years back, and there's a network associated with that book across the planet who are thinking about these questions of how do we do professional military education and how do we do better work on culture. So we're going to be leveraging that. We're going to be leveraging our relationships with other think tanks across the planet, and we do have plans and actions already taken to be part of this conversation and to really push forward on that. I guess the last thing I'd mention is that when we're bringing in an international community to reflect on this, it's really a two-way kind of sharing. If we have panels with other countries, I know that we're planning on inviting New Zealand, Australia, and the UK to have these conversations with us. But we should note that Operation Honor, for example, is also something that Canada has exported to these countries, and a lot of countries are learning from us in the process. So I think many, and we heard it yesterday in conversations with General Campbell as well, where many other armed forces across the planet are dealing with the same types of issues, and we can learn from one another and share back best practices, and that's part of the conversation that I personally am committed to and that I will bring the CDA Institute to do more work on. So I'm going to hand it over to Guy Thibault now.
Thanks, Yuri, and thanks, Mercedes, for the panel. I'd like to say that, you know, we originally planned the Ottawa Conference. We hadn't expected that we would be having this panel in the middle of the Ottawa Conference this year. But clearly, with the issues that have been brought to the fore in the public eye as it reflects on the institution, and especially on the leadership, you know, we felt it was essential that we would contribute to that discussion, and really appreciate Mercedes, you leading it, and certainly with Admiral Patterson and Colonel Heer and Mr. Grégoire, great to see you again, and my old friend Al Okros as well. Great to have you, Al, to share some of your thoughts. And, you know, as I kind of reflect on this, you know, we know that there's a lot of debate, there's a lot of discussion, there's a lot of opinions being shared, and there's a lot of arguments being made. And I think at the heart of it, it's really just important to not lose sight of really what's at its core. And what's at its core is really that all members of the Canadian Forces deserve to work in an environment where they're safe and they're being treated with respect. That's what we all want, and it's what we should all expect. And clearly, you know, there will be changes coming, and some of these changes that are going to be coming are going to be imposed on the organization, and that's okay, because, like, in the end, whether it be our policies, procedures, systems, and structures, if they're going to, I think it was Colonel Heer mentioned it, if it's going to help work, you know, to give our members better tools at their disposition to deal with conflict in the workplace, that's good. But the cultural change that needs to happen in the Canadian Forces is only going to come from within. It can't be imposed. It's going to have to come from really our thinking about ourselves. I always talked about duty with honor, and really looking at ourselves, you know, in the mirror, taking a hard look at ourselves. But I think that certainly for the members that are serving the forces today, and you know, we kind of look at what you represent, you know, I think we can have confidence that we're going to continue to deal and make the changes that are necessary. I'd also like to just take this opportunity and, you know, to say thanks to folks like Mercedes, you know, the reporters who bring the experiences of our members. These are our members of the Canadian Forces, and they're telling their stories to us in some ways that, you know, I think we need to reflect on. And I know that relations with the media, sometimes when you're in government and with the armed forces and the department, sometimes it feels a bit adversarial or even maybe hostile sometimes. And but when it comes to thinking about this story, a story that goes back to the late 90s when, you know, Maclean's published their first kind of really hard-hitting articles on rape in the Canadian Forces, and it carries on with the story in L'Actualité in 2014 when I'm the vice chief about Master Corporal Raymond, and which really leads us into that first shock really about what's going on and how are we going to deal with it, and leading to all of the work of Op Honor And now, Mercedes, with your reporting, on these allegations, which really strike at a core about our leadership, Canadians and I think members of the Canadian Forces are asking some legitimate and very important questions about leadership, our military culture, and the way that our men and women who are serving are being treated. And I think this is a dialogue, this is a discussion that in the end we need to have. And as Colonel Heer said, like, it is happening. And I think that's one of the positive things that we should take from all of this. In a chat the other day, on these issues with one of my buddies, Mike Day, Lieutenant General Day, who everybody here would probably know, he reminded me of a basic tenet of leadership. It's we're all taught it from day one. It's know your people and promote their welfare. And it's thanks to reporters like Mercedes that we actually get reminded about what right looks like. And I think that's an important piece. So to you, Mercedes, thank you for continuing to cover the story. Thank you for the interests that you show in national defense and security and in our armed forces. As Yuri just mentioned, certainly for us at the Institute and CDA, it's our intention to continue the dialogue and to be a positive contributor to helping make the Canadian Forces a better place to work. And with participation from everybody, we know that is our common objective. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to take a very short break, and we're going to kind of reload for our next part of the program, which is going to be a keynote address by the Acting Chief of Defense Staff, Lieutenant General Wayne Heer. So once again, to all of our panelists and to Mercedes, thank you very much for contributing to the dialogue on this important topic. Thank you.